Every game, every side, every total. It's NFL week number 4. And in this video, I'm going to talk about every game and give you my thoughts on what's good to bet, what's bad to bet, and what I'm thinking about each side and total as we go through. Let's get right into it and start off with the Dallas Cowboys on the road at the New York Giants. Dallas laying 5.5 points currently with a total of 45. And I'll be quite honest, I wrote this game up and I was advocating for a bet. I was advocating for a release at -4 when this game reopened. Unfortunately, just market timing and how this number was moving didn't allow us to get it out. At 5.5, I would certainly still lean towards the Dallas Cowboys, but it is a lower level of confidence than what it was earlier in the week. I would still advocate for a lean to Dallas at anything less than 6. This is a massive game for the Dallas Cowboys season after 2 brutal losses that they have suffered, and they are now facing a division opponent who they completely beat up in both matchups last year, and they get a defense that has taken a step back on the other side. Last week, the New York Giants had a lot of success against the Cleveland Browns, and it was really because Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, threw a bit of a curveball and something different at the Cleveland Browns. He spiked his blitz rate considerably as the game went on, and it was in part for 2 reasons. One, the offensive line for Cleveland is dealing with a ton of injuries and is really banged up. So the blitz for New York was able to get home and disrupt a lot of what Cleveland was trying to do. Number 2 was that he had Deshaun Watson in the pocket without any threat of a run game. The Browns haven't been able to get anything going on the ground, and Watson, when under pressure, has seen his numbers completely fall off a cliff this year and has had nothing going on offense. And so when I think about the Giants' visible defensive improvement in that game against Cleveland, what caused that to happen, I don't think is a viable option against the Dallas Cowboys. Not only is the Cowboys' offensive line considerably better than the injury-riddled line that the Cleveland Browns have, but Dak Prescott, when blitzed and when pressured, is elite. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL when he's facing either of those situations, and it's the one thing you do not want to do when you're facing the Dallas Cowboys, because Dak Prescott is just going to eat you alive when you're doing that. So that curveball that helped the Giants get away with a win against the Cleveland Browns probably isn't in play. I also start to question what Bowen is going to do now that the Giants have multiple injuries in the defensive backfield. And this is going to be something we have to watch as the week goes on. But Nick McLeod, Adoree Jackson, and Drew Phillips all dealing with injuries coming out of that game. And those are 3 guys in a defensive backfield expected to start and play time, but now dealing with injuries. It's not a good secondary to begin with. And when I think about Dallas against this secondary with guys likely down, that's a pretty positive matchup for the Dallas Cowboys in this game. So to me, this is a number that we were looking at that was as high as 7 on some of the look-aheads. We see it adjusted down. It's a game that the Cowboys have to have against an opponent they have dominated, and they have some injury favorable matchups in the defensive backfield for New York that will allow that passing game to succeed. And this is a Giants defense that saw the Washington Commanders go up and down the field against them in week 1, saw the Vikings only need 2.5 quarters to hang 28 points and sit on the ball for the latter portion of the 4th quarter and not need to do anything because the game was so far out of reach. It's not a good defense, and the Cowboys can certainly exploit it. Let's say hello to everybody in the chat. Good group of guys back, as always, for the live stream. Good to see the little community that is starting to grow into live chat as we're into season 2 of the live previews. Jeff says, another week, the most informative show out there when it comes to the NFL. Love and appreciate the information. Appreciate you coming back, Jeff. David Rosansky, as always, in for all the live streams. Same with Devin Bark, 2 regulars that are always around for the live streams. Good to see you guys back. Justin says, completely agree that the information on this show and every morning market rundown on the Simple Handicap, which is into year number 7, is exactly what you need to be successful. On this note, Justin, I just want to remind everybody about something that has started up this week, but has been going for the whole season. I feel like some of this has been missed in just everything that's happening with the NFL and the quick start to the season. Over at, well, I've got the depth chart up there, but over at bettingtalk.com, I have a weekly thread where I post all sorts of information. If I see something that stands out to me in an article or a video, I'll transcribe it, I'll clip it, I'll bold what stands out to me, post about coverages, post about offensive stats, some prop notes. Here's one on Gibson and Stevenson. lots of review tape, film analysis, a bit of everything goes into what I'm calling the catch-all thread over at bettingtalk.com. So if you're finding all of the information here on the weekly preview or the daily podcast, and you're just looking for a spot where you can have all the information all day long put into one area, I would highly recommend everybody going over to check out bettingtalk.com and see if that is something that is interesting for you, because it's certainly got a pretty good response so far this week, and I'm going to continue doing it every week the rest of the season. Hello to Riley Carroll. Also seeing Jay Nava back for another show. Please tell me my Bears are going to be fine this season. It's rough being a Bears fan. Bears are going to be fine. Your Bears are going to win this week as well. We'll talk about that game coming up in just a couple of minutes. Want to say hello to Diana, Jesse, Ed Redmond's back in the chat. Mitchell Paul is already asking about Malik Neighbors props. I don't have any thoughts there for you, Mitchell, on the Neighbors prop. Gerard Morris is back from the good state of Washington. Moonfish, a happy Ravens fan after last week getting the victory. Gerard celebrating the Seahawks 3-0, he says, for the Seattle Seahawks. Good to see so far. And then BOS Man 1, getting smarter week by week. Thank you, Adam. Before we get started with the Sunday games, I just want to encourage everybody, if you want to help me out and let me know what you're enjoying from the show or the podcast, or what, more importantly, you might want to see, or something you think could make it a little bit better or improve on things a little bit, whether you want to leave it in the live chat or in the comment section down below, would help me out a lot as I'm trying to make these videos as good as they can be. I'm also going to have some pre-recorded stuff on individual games coming out here on the YouTube channel throughout the rest of the week. A couple videos. I'll talk about some teasers. I'll talk about some sides and totals as well that come up, and perhaps even some props as we get into Thursday and Friday. But you can maybe expect 2 to 3 videos coming out in addition to this preview. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel and you want to be able to watch those, the subscribe button is down below, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoy it. With all that said, let's get to the Sunday games. It's New Orleans on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons, a 1.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 42.5. Give me the Falcons here at -1.5 at home, in a game that they set up pretty well against what I think is a Saints team that's going to go through a bit of a transition here as they start to figure things out. So I think the Saints, off that loss last week against Philadelphia, not only came back down to earth and maybe indicated that weeks 1 and 2 were kind of a false result, part of that being the opponent, but part of that being the surprise, but they have 2 kind of big problems coming out of that game that they played last week. Number one is that Vic Fangio completely kind of exposed how you want to defend the New Orleans Saints. He put 5 and 6 guys in the defensive front, showed 5-2 and 6-1 looks in the defensive front, and the Saints outside zone game that set up everything that they wanted to do just didn't work. What it also allowed the Eagles to do is generate a lot of pressure on the offensive line and in the backfield, where Derek Carr is incredibly sensitive to anything that's moving up in his face. And we saw Derek Carr's numbers really take a step back, and we saw the Saints offense really look anemic. And it was a scoreline of 15-12 that was in no way reflective of just how dominating the performance was by the Eagles against the Saints. And the injuries that are now stacking up on the Saints offensive line give me a lot of concern. And there's indications that they might be worse than they're initially reported to be. So we know that McCoy, the center, is getting surgery today. And Nick Underhill, who covers the team, had a big article on his site this morning about how it's not something that the Saints can replace, and it's a big issue for them that there's not really an answer for. This was a Saints team that came into the season with concerns at both left and right tackle that held up in weeks 1 and 2, but got completely undressed against the Philadelphia Eagles front. Now you don't have the center, and we also don't know what the status is of Ruiz, who got banged up in that game too. There was some hinting that the injury report for the Saints is going to be worse than expected because of how many guys got banged up in the Eagles game. So that's something to watch as the week progresses. But it feels to me like this is kind of a readjustment here on the Saints that hasn't quite gone far enough to the Atlanta Falcons. When I look at what Atlanta wants to do on offense, it's a lot of those outside zone concepts with Bijan Robinson, which should work and be in play this entire game, because no defense in the league has been worse at defending the outside zone runs than the Saints so far through 3 weeks. So that core of the Atlanta offense that has been very successful should be, in fact, more successful in this matchup. And if it allows things to open up a little bit in the passing game and we get the Falcons offense finally playing and looking like they have at times in the later portions of games the last 2 weeks, that I think makes the Atlanta Falcons a pretty interesting team to look at and a pretty interesting team to potentially bet into. And so in this game, with the price of 1.5, give me the Atlanta Falcons. I think this is a good spot for them and a readjustment for the Saints in this market. Pittsburgh, a 2-point favorite on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Total in this game is 40. Give me the Colts here +2 at home in a game that I think we finally see the offense fully click and get going. Now, believe it or not, the Indianapolis Colts for the season are second in yards per play on offense. This in many ways is going to be a step up for the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of opposing offenses that they have faced. So far for Pittsburgh, it's been pretty easy going and pretty smooth sailing, facing a rookie quarterback, padding some stats. Last week, you had the injury to Herbert. In the small window of time that Herbert was in that game, playing at far less than 100%, we saw that the secondary for Pittsburgh could be exploited and you could throw on this defense. And that was a Chargers team with Herbert at less than 100% that doesn't have a lot of viable outside weapons. And now going on the road to take on the Colts, Indy's been very boomer bust on offense with Richardson. They've generated a ton of explosive plays. He's been really attacking guys downfield, but it's a spot to me where the Colts offense is just, they can get a game here that isn't riddled with mistakes that cost them at the end. I think Downs coming back last week is going to change the offense, and you get him now closer to 100% in this game. He was a favorite target of Richardson in the offseason. It just needs to tighten things up a little bit. Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield has looked awesome, and it's a big part of why the Colts yards per play is so high on offense. And if you just get a clean game from Richardson without those just mind-numbing turnovers that have happened inside the red zone the last couple of weeks to kill them, you're getting a very, very good Colts offense with a very, very good play caller in Shane Steichen that I think can kind of magnify some of the issues we saw briefly in the first half that the Chargers were pushing a little bit with an inferior offense to what the Colts are going to have on the field in this game. And so I like the matchup at home here for the Colts. I like their offense. I think it's a game where everything clicks, and it's a price point for me on Pittsburgh that is just too high. We saw this Indy -1 on the look ahead. We are now through the 0 to Pittsburgh up at 2. This is signaling that the Steelers are rated higher than the Colts. And even with their start, I'm just not there, and I'm not ready to accept that that is, in fact, the true case. So give me the Colts here +2 at home. No thoughts in this one at the current total. We did have a release on the over earlier in the week. Jacksonville on the road at the Houston Texans. Texans laying 7 at home. Total in this game is 45. I'm passing on both the side and the total. No opinion from me on this game. I would say that before this got to 7, it was a rare case where you guys follow the show, you follow the preview. You know that typically I'm looking to play some of these numbers that get either jacked up or inflated after a pretty significant result the week prior, or at least that's where the handicap tends to start. And I'm looking for reasons why it's gone too much. Has it gone not enough? That's the name of the game and what you get from a lot of my process and what I like to look at. And so naturally, I think people listening to the podcast or watching the preview would say, this is probably a game where Adam is looking to the Jags because we saw Houston around 4.5. They're now up to 7. Not only is this pretty big deviation from where these two teams were rated preseason, but just on a weekly basis with the Texans suffering an ugly loss last week, like what are you getting? How are you getting to this far and how are you getting to this price? I actually kind of disagree with all of that. And this was a game that I was trying to justify and write up for Houston at less than 7. I thought that this was kind of one of the rare cases with even with the number being bumped up, I was trying to find a way into back Houston. What would be interesting? How do we get there? And just could never quite come to a compelling enough case to get that over the line. My initial thought on this was that Houston in the last 2 weeks has faced really difficult defenses. The Bears through 3 weeks, according to True Media, are number 1 in defensive success rate. Last week, facing Brian Flores and the Vikings defense, it is a team that everybody across the league is raving about his scheme and how difficult it is to play. And now, to me, looking at this, it was going to be a reprieve for Houston at home against this Jags defense, which under Ryan Nielsen has just played a ton of man coverage. They lead the league in man coverage usage. They are down key corners. They are down key safeties. And still they are sticking with what Ryan Nielsen wants to do. And he's just trying to like force it to make it work. What I found interesting in looking at this, because in my mind, I was like, okay, CJ Stroud at home is facing a defense that is down key guys, that is playing a very predictable scheme, that teams are really starting to open up. That seems like a positive matchup for Houston to get right after the big loss. Last year, CJ Stroud was among the best QBs in the league when facing zone. We saw in week 1 against Gus Bradley's defense, which plays a ton of cover 3, lives in zone coverage. CJ Stroud picked them apart and have a big game. Against man coverage last year, CJ Stroud oddly was bottom 7 in terms of QBR when throwing against man coverage. For some reason, there was a difference in how he was processing it and the success that he was having. And so that matchup that initially in my mind seemed like a big positive might not be as strong as it was. I was thinking that the acquisition of Stephon Diggs against man coverage would be a big positive, and this is why part of the reason they brought him in, but also a matchup that he could really have a big game and stand out. And I looked last year in Buffalo, and those spots where it was just subjectively watching it, the Diggs was good against man coverage, his numbers comparatively to the rest of the league were actually not that high either. So kind of these preconceived thoughts about Houston, what the offense is and what they match up well against, I thought that would all come together here, but it's not actually as true as I thought that it was. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to happen, and the Jags, in many ways, are not a dead team, especially on defense, but it is just, in my mind, kind of a reset to be like, hold on a minute, it's maybe not as strong as I thought that it was. I don't quite know how to reconcile the Jags defensive front, which film guys continue to be high on, even after last week against Buffalo. The tone has certainly cooled a little bit, but everybody's talking about the secondary for the Jags defense being the issue, and that's tied into scheme. The defensive front is kind of avoiding all of that criticism. Now, linebacker injury, they suffered a key one coming out of the Buffalo game. Maybe that changes it. I don't know. The Jags, to me, are a tough team to grade. Offensively, it just looks completely disconnected and a bit of a mess. And so, it's a pass for me. I was trying to make the case for Houston. We're at 7. That would be a very tough sell now, especially considering how tough a sell it was at 6.5. And it's a game that I'm not going to find myself involved in, and a game that I'm staying away from at the moment. I'm going to check up on some of the questions before we get to Vikings Packers, as there's 25 of them coming in. Luke says, morning, Adam. I love the insight and the way you read the market prices. Always strong. Appreciate that very much. Delaney asks, where do you get your statistics from? Is it a subscription service or a free information website? I'd say there's probably 8 to 10 free sites that you can kind of aggregate all from. A subscription site that I like and that I use, although it's becoming quite pricey in availability, is In and Out of Sports Info Solutions. We're debating whether or not it's a subscription to continue or free sites can piece things together. Something that we're kind of keeping an eye on, but it's pretty pricey, but they have everything. It's a great dashboard as well. So that's something that if you're interested in looking at, you can look at that as well. Perhaps a good question to either drop in the comments or over at Betting Talk can get into some of the sites and things that I use on a weekly basis. More questions. Sal says, new listener. Great stuff. Good to have. Paul Enzo always in with the revenge talk. Cody says, coming over from the Memphis Jason and John show. There we go, Cody. Appreciate it very much. Do a weekly ESPN radio spot in Memphis, and so good to see listeners coming over from that. Robbie says, thoughts on Giants O versus Dallas D? Good question, something that we can revisit towards the end of the show there, Robbie. A few more questions. Renzo says, one question. When will you start talking about QB offense versus specific coverage like zone versus man, blitz, no blitz, mobile QB versus defense? That was great. I think I just did Renzo that game a little bit before, but that's something I try to include in everything that I do. So if you have anything specific or you want more of it, good question to drop in the comments down below. I can pull up some numbers and look at anything that you want to. Patrick says, I don't like the Colts as a teaser option at all. Boomer bust isn't compatible with teasing. So I actually disagree with this, Patrick. I think the Colts are a great teaser leg this week. I think pairing them with the Buccaneers makes for a really good two-leg teaser. And while Boomer Bust is not compatible with teasing, I would disagree with that in two ways. The first would be it's a good thing if you have a team like the Colts who are trailing. If you get down 10-17, you're getting a team that generates a lot of explosives. And when you're thinking about staying within the margin they have to for teasers, that's a nice asset in an offensive play caller and an offense to have. But then the other thing that I would say is when you're looking at the Steelers in this matchup, that is a team that is very much the opposite. The Steelers are not going out and putting up big numbers on offense and winning and covering by big margin. Last week, they win by 10, but that was a game where there was a QB injury and a big switch. And that was a game where Justin Fields played flawlessly. There was one pick that wasn't on him, but the numbers for Fields coming out of that game were as good as they've been for him in any game in his career. And that's a game the Steelers get away with winning by 10. So I actually think both qualities of these teams set up pretty well for teasers. We'll talk about the Eagles and Bucks a little bit later. But you're looking at the Steelers -2 with a total of 40, and you're getting on the other side of 8 in a short total with an aggressive Colts offense. I think that's a nice look for the teaser in there as well. Let's keep going. Minnesota on the road at the Green Bay Packers. So definite lean here to me to Green Bay -2.5. No opinion on the total, which has been bet down, but that makes a lot of sense for why it has. This is a lean in the assumption that Jordan Love is going to be under center for the Green Bay Packers. But I actually believe that in this game, the bigger factor is going to be the Green Bay Packers defense, which has been sneaky good. And we saw last week what happens when they're playing a team that does not have a mobile quarterback and how their scheme changes. So the Packers with Jeff Hafley, the new defensive coordinator, have been generating pressure all season long. They've not been able to get home and generate a lot of sacks. All of that changed last week when they were able to get home a ton and cause a lot of havoc in the backfield against the Tennessee Titans. Where this gets interesting is post-game, players came out and started talking about why everything was different. And the biggest difference was in weeks 1 and 2, the Green Bay Packers faced mobile quarterbacks. And so there were specifics put into the pass rush for how they wanted to rush and how they wanted to rush to contain the opposing quarterback and keep him inside the pocket. And last week, we saw the defense for the Packers completely take over the game because they were not facing a mobile quarterback. And this is a pass rush that is much improved over last year. And this is a secondary that's playing a lot more aggressive, but is also really clamping down on key receivers outside. And you had very strong quotes from Jair Alexander post-game about how things are coming together. There were a lot of comments from reporters and team guys about how some of these blitzes were very strong against the run game, but also how much they've tightened up in that area. And then McKinney was also talking about how special this group is and how things are really starting to click in practice, and they're starting to see it on the field. And so in a game here where I think the conversation is going to be dominated by what do we get from Jordan Love and the Packers offense against Brian Flores and the Vikings defense, I think the bigger deciding factor is this Packers defense, which might actually be underrated, going up against Sam Darnold, who's not mobile, and they're going to be able to attack in the pocket. And then it kind of, to me, ties together a lot of stuff that I'm seeing from film guys that I respect. So Benjamin Solak is someone who I read every single week over at ESPN, and Ted Wynn is someone who I read every week over at The Athletic. They do amazing work that's fantastic. And both of them kind of insinuated through 3 weeks, like, yes, Sam Darnold is having success and he looks great, and Kevin O'Connell is working miracles, but there's a caveat from both of them. And it's like Sam Darnold is getting away with putting the ball in harm's way a ton. And it's both of them kind of pointing out clips and in their articles referencing it and pointing it out to be like, this is not something that you're getting away with all season long. And it's been working out pretty well for them. But you have this Packers defense that is just built, to me, to disrupt an offense like Minnesota. You have the outside corner that can match up with Jefferson. You have the more aggressive scheme. You have the pass rush that is starting to open things up. You get Darnold flustered in the pocket. You get the mistakes. And then you get the QB bump on the other side on offense. This, to me, sets up to be a pretty good spot for Green Bay. And so the only reason that I would caveat it with a bit of a lean is just we don't know Jordan Love's status. He is going to be limited in practice days every single day this week. I would expect there's probably in that 75% range that he is going to go. If he plays, this number to me cannot be less than 3. It has been adjusted down. Everybody wants to run him back the Vikings. I get it. In this spot, though, I think it's the Packers defense that is going to win them the game. I think this is a spot where Green Bay wins and covers if Jordan Love is, in fact, in under center at quarterback. Cincinnati, -4.5 on the road at Carolina. Total in this game is 48. We talked about the Jags Texans. Now it's like, here's the game that you would expect me to go a certain way. I can't disagree with that this way. I would have a lean here to the Cincinnati Bengals at -4.5. And this was a game that we saw priced right around 7. You get the Andy Dalton bump. You get the Carolina Panthers win. You get the Carolina Panthers cover. It's the reset. It's the win for Dave Canales. And all of a sudden, the offseason Panthers takes have life. It's a revival. Here we go. We're back with Carolina. Now, I want to hit the brakes a little bit. I'm excited about it. I think Andy Dalton obviously gives the Panthers a chance to not only exceed their win total, but be competitive the rest of the season against a very soft schedule. I just have a hard time ignoring the Bengals in this spot at -4.5. Full-on desperation. 2% of teams that go 0-3 make the playoffs. If you're Cincinnati, you've got to have this game. There's no questions about it. And I think that there's some positives that you look at here for Cincinnati, especially on offense, building and going forward. Against Washington, they got T. Higgins back. You have all breaking out a little bit, starting to be more part of the offense. You have Jamar Chase appearing to be at 100%. You have a game where you don't punt against the Washington Commanders. You put up more than 30 points. You get away with the win. All right, you get away with the loss. But now it's coming into Carolina. It's like the offense has another week to potentially get the win, is where I was going with that, and to potentially look at that level that we would expect from the Bengals. Higgins, with another full week, should be at 100% coming off of the injury. Chase now has no excuses. You have another weapon to integrate into the offense. You have Yossi Voss, who's becoming a great number 3 and moving it around in the slot. Like, everything coming off of that game for Cincinnati has to be better in this spot. And I think it will, because the difference between the Commanders defense and the difference between the Panthers defense is not significant. If anything, the Panthers defense might actually be worse than what Cincinnati just faced on Washington on Monday Night Football. The offensive performance that Cincinnati put forth in Monday Night Football is typically one that wins a very high percentage of the time. It was more a reflection of how bad the Bengals defense is than it was anything the offense did not do for the Bengals. And in this matchup, like, we saw what it took from Washington, an amazing performance from Jaden Daniels. Everything went right. Everything clicked. We talked about how Washington last week on the preview would have success and could cover the game. Like, can Carolina repeat that? I don't know. And I lean towards no, because now Adam Thielen goes on IR. He was a favorite target of Andy Dalton. They really pushed Deontay Johnson into the number 1 role. He looked good against the Raiders defense. But here's what kind of becomes the interesting point is it's a hard grade on Carolina to say what they are. Against the Raiders, commentary post-game were that the Raiders defense quit in that game. And there was some interesting commentary from film folks who watched the All-22. They were like, I see what Antonio Pierce was upset about. And so to me, it's kind of an interesting way to figure out what we actually got from Carolina. Was it the Panthers offense being this dramatically better, or was that aided a bit by the Raiders defense, especially as the game went on? And it kind of masked how the Panthers defense is still a pretty big issue. And so betting into the Bengals offense here in a desperation spot to get things right and to cover on the road here and pick off where they were on Monday Night Football, to me, is a more appealing spot than backing the Panthers here at 4.5. So I like Cincinnati in this matchup, would have a definite lean to them here at 4.5. LA Rams on the road at the Chicago Bears. Bears -3. Total in this game is 41. Give me the Bears here at -3. It is a release that we sent out earlier in the week at a price that was less than 3. Unfortunately, I was watching the board this morning. There were some 2.5s left. That is no longer the case. The Bears are 3-point favorites. This is a game the Bears win and cover at home. This is a game where the Bears offense, after last week, picks up off. And this is a game where the Rams come in as the 32nd ranked team in yards per play allowed. And I think we see their defense struggle. And offensively, I believe it is going to be tough to replicate what LA did last week on offense against the Bears defense that is sneaky good and I think quite underrated. To me, this is a spot where Chicago thrives, wins, and covers. Want to talk about the offense specifically. Last week against the Indianapolis Colts, it was frustrating. It was annoying to watch, but it was hard to ignore how even when you remove the DJ Moore catch on the Hail Mary at the end of half, Caleb Williams still over 300 yards, which used to be something very easy to achieve. Now in the 2024 version of the NFL, it's becoming a bit of an oddity. It felt like the Bears offense just got things moving a little bit and started to move towards the right direction. Rome Odunze had a breakout game, finally got on the same page with Caleb Williams. You had Moore as a factor and a part of the game. There's a chance on the outside that we get Keenan Allen back for the Bears offense this game. Just feels like things are starting to get right. But this is a game where the Bears are absolutely going to go back to the run game. Post-game, Caleb Williams was like, I threw it 55 times. Really? Like, he didn't believe the numbers that he was put in. The Bears talked about correcting it, and they're going to be able to run the football against this LA Rams front. Post-game, Sean McVay didn't even want to take credit for the Rams offensive shift and the 12 personnel curveball they threw at the 49ers. He was talking about how concerned he was for the defense and how big of an issue that it is. And this is now a Bears offense that is going into week 2 after finding something last week that is going to have a bit of a layup in terms of opponent of defensive strengths that they face in this game. This is also the LA Rams, after playing every game indoors this season, going into Chicago, playing on the grass. It's going to slow them down. It does to all of the dome teams. I think that's an advantage for Chicago, especially when they're able to run the ball. A lot of talk about Rashawn Johnson being more involved in this spot too. This, to me, just seems like the correction spot, the get right spot for the Bears. They figure it out. And then defensively, the Rams got away with a lot against the 49ers. They were obviously sub 3% win probability in the fourth quarter. They pull off the miracle comeback, but everything for LA broke right in that game. So San Francisco had their fastest linebacker that they were using in place of Devondre Campbell to match up and defend what the Rams were trying to do with Kyron Williams. He goes down right away. Winters suffered an injury late in the first quarter. As soon as he went out, the Rams started targeting Campbell with Williams. Williams ended up having 3 touchdowns. Tre'Davious Ward, there's a tongue twister you have to throw out, for the 49ers, was dealing with a leg injury for the entire week, was in and out of practice. The Rams get Tutu Atwell, a shifty speed guy that's smaller on the outside, working against Ward, and they picked on that matchup a ton throughout the game, and Atwell had a surprisingly big game. There were comments about how guys on the 49ers defense were not quite at 100%, and the Rams were just finding spots to pick and choose on those specific 49ers injuries or limitations. And to me, that is a sign of just how familiar McVay is with the 49ers defense. The two teams know each other inside and out. And it was just McVay in a just heroic scheme spot, shifting the 12 personnel, throwing the curveball, played it more than 40% of the time. Typically, it's 95% 3 wide receiver sets. He knows the team is limited, and just threw the curveball and got everything to break his way against the 49ers defense. We talked about kind of like what comes next as the encore last week. And for LA and the Rams, I don't know what the encore is. I don't know what they're pulling out this week to find it and get it right. And even in that game against the 49ers, they needed everything to break right to just come back and just escape with the win. And I don't buy into this number needing to be adjusted down off of that. This was Bears -4 on the look ahead. It's now been bet back up to 3, but still it's short. And I think the Rams got really fortunate to get away with the win. So I like the Bears here at home, still laying 3. Let's catch up on some of the commentary here and the questions. Appreciate you guys keeping them coming in. We'll try to get to all of them. If you have more questions, you're watching this after, in the comment section down below. Would love to hear comments, whether what you think about the show, if you have any specifics about matchups or questions that you want to get at. Would love to comment and talk about any of them if you have them. Ed says, I agree with Adamir. I don't know what you're agreeing with, but I agree with you that you agree with me. I like it, Ed. Justin says, I think you will be able to get 2.5 again before kickoff. Yeah, it's possible. The fact that it's been bet up pretty aggressively to 3 makes me wonder, but it's been a 3.5 weeks so far that I can't help but feel there's a ton of manipulation in the market around key numbers. And I don't know if I know there's been a lot of disagreement just internally within our conference calls and discussions about who likes what, which to me is a pretty strong indication that, hey, like these lines are really, really tight. What we're also seeing is a lot of disagreement, not only just against the service, but multiple services disagreeing with each other, releasing back. So there's tighter lines, but there also has to be a level of manipulation around some of these key numbers when we're thinking about account longevity. I think there's an effort of manipulation to avoid having closing line value on some certain sides or totals to perhaps preserve accounts. There's ways to get around that. Like you look at the Cowboys, there's also a lot of faking going on in the market. I mean, there was no way the Giants position that came in on Monday and into Tuesday was a real one. I think we saw the true buy on the Cowboys coming back, but also around a lot of 6 and 6.5s. We're seeing numbers kind of inexplicably go back the other way. And to me, there's just a lot of what looks like faking and manipulation going on, certainly earlier in the week. And I think there's some intentions from bigger groups and bigger players to have numbers look a different way. And so in terms of how lines have been moving and how things have been going, it's been a very difficult season in terms of trying to decipher what's true and what isn't. And there's been a ton of two-way action on a lot of these games around keys. Let's see if that continues this week. You might be right that we do see a 2.5 back, because it's kind of been, if you miss a key, especially on like 4s and 6s, there's a good chance later in the week you get it back again. And I think that's been kind of unique here for the first couple of weeks as well. Patrick says Swift has been awful. Johnson, ? There was a pretty strong quote that Johnson is going to be involved that was shared post-game a little bit more this game coming up. It was about getting him going and getting him more involved, and the Rams defense is certainly going to allow them to do so. Robbie says, great spot for the Bears. Only concern is the coaching disadvantage. It certainly is. I agree with that for sure. And other than that, Gerard says, Houston is a good survivor. I'll let you guys chat about the survivor commentary in the live chat. That has been a whirlwind for a lot of folks to navigate all season long. Next game up is Denver on the road at the New York Jets. Denver in this game, a 7.5-point underdog. We just talked about games getting to a key and coming back. This game was 8.5. There was a release from another service, got down to 7. The Jets take money at 7. We're now back up to 7.5. It's just been constant all year, especially early in the week. So my initial lean in this game was Denver at 8.5 and 8. And I posted a write-up as a possible to say, like, do we want to get involved in Denver here? Is there interest? And that was met with some disagreement. I think the number is right at 7.5. I would say that the total is right as well at 39, and this is a pass for me. Just commentary on what I thought from Denver. One, their defense looks much better than it is being graded out to be. I think that is a unit, especially at the linebacker group, as well as Surtain in the backfield. I think it is underrated. I think it's a strong point of this team. And so in this matchup, if I think about what the Jets do on offense, they're moving so slow. Even in that game against the Pats where they were in control, it was play clock down to 4 seconds, 3 seconds, nearly every snap for Rodgers, just glacial in their pace. When it clicks and it works and Rodgers is on, it's amazing because they shorten the game, they suffocate the opponent. When you start getting laying north of a touchdown and you're needing to win by 2 scores and cover by margin, you need everything to go right, especially now that the totals are starting to reflect it, right? It's a tough subset when you're laying this big of a number needing to cover with such a short total. Against a defense like Denver, I think Surtain can match up with Garrett Wilson quite well. And now it becomes Rodgers dealing with Lazard and Williams. And that, to me, when you're getting into this range of numbers, it gets tough. Now, don't get me wrong. There might be a very real underpricing here for the Jets if Rodgers continues to look as good as he did Thursday night against the Pats. But to me, it's a risky proposition when you're starting to lay this big a number with a team like the Jets that plays as slow as they do in games that are lined this short. I have not a ton of optimism about Bo Nix going on the road and looking like he did against a Buccaneers defense that was riddled with injuries up front, riddled with injuries in the defensive backfield, and replicating that same level of offensive play against this Jets defense. But I do think the Broncos ground game can find success. Won't look as good as the Niners did in week 1, but that's where this offense wants to live. And when you're getting potentially a Broncos defense that can keep the game tight and an offense that should be able to run the football, and you're getting north of a touchdown with such a short total in a game that's going to operate from a pace perspective very low, it's kind of an appealing price to take. But with it sitting where it is, there was just enough disagreement on the other side that those Jets numbers might be real and that performance boost might be real too. So it's a stay away for me in this game on the side of the total. Philadelphia -2.5 with a total of 45 on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Give me the Buccaneers in this one, +2.5. Now, this is going to be a bet I feel very good about later in the week if the injury report falls the way I expect it to do. I want to warn everybody, it is Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. There's a lot of unknowns in this game that could end up making this opinion look pretty bad. But here's my stance on it and why I'm looking at Tampa Bay +2.5 here, and I have some confidence in it. Philadelphia has injuries to Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, and Lane Johnson. Those 3 guys not participating in this game for the Eagles make this adjustment up from pick to -2.5 a jump that I cannot agree with. There is no way that I can get there if those guys are not playing, because the limitations that the Eagles will have on offense are massive. I mean, that cannot be overstated enough. If you take away wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, your best offensive lineman, and potentially Becton as well at right guard, I mean, you're not dealing with a lot here as the Eagles. You have Jalen Hurts, you have Saquon Barkley going up against a defense that should be set up to defend it. Now, the caveat, as I said, with the injuries, Vita Vea was back at practice this morning. He had a knee brace that I would only imagine is as large as my torso on his knee that he's dealing with an injury. Whether or not he is able to go is a big question mark. If he does not go, the Eagles have an out. The Eagles will be able to run the football. Without him in the lineup, some of the clips last week were just embarrassing for the Buccaneers defensive front. So you need Vita Vea out there. Kalijah Kancey was off working to the side this morning. When that happens in a Wednesday morning practice, it's not typically a positive sign for the chance of that player playing on Sunday. So it seems like Kancey is going to miss. Antoine Winfield, the best player in the defensive backfield and a top safety in the league, was also working on the side. So that might be a bit of an issue too. But to me, Vita Vea in the middle of that defensive line is key in this game, especially with the Eagles' offensive injuries. The reason that I'm kind of looking at Tampa Bay here, I'm willing to risk that the Eagles do not play Smith and do not play Brown in this game because they have the bye next week. Brown is dealing with a hamstring injury. I don't know why the Eagles, off of the win against the Saints, would want to rush Brown back in this scenario when they have the bye on deck and Smith in concussion protocol. I don't know why they're forcing him back either. This seems like a spot where it's a bit of a caution play for the Eagles, and they hold those guys out. That's my take on it. You take those guys away from the Eagles offense, it can't be a price bump up here for Philadelphia. As bad as the Buccaneers defense has looked due to the injuries, I just can't get into that, and I can't buy it. And so that is why I'm looking at the Buccaneers here getting 2.5 points. Just want to catch up on some more questions. Appreciate the 38 questions pending. It's a lot to get through. So it's good to see everybody coming through. Lots of Survivor talk as well into the chat. Again, you guys sort through that and try to figure it out. Paul Enzo brings up a good point that I forgot to mention. As we're talking about Aaron Rodgers, the elevated level of play, you wonder, like, how much emphasis is there here on the Hackett revenge? Going back into Denver, does Rodgers really push to win it for an offensive coordinator he's gone to bat to for the last 6 or 7 seasons? Like, there's clearly a connection between the two guys. Rodgers is always out defending him. There's no question. You're watching highlights of the Jets. Like, this team is fully bought in. The McAfee interview yesterday where Rodgers was confirming it. I mean, there's such a media target, but there's real chemistry building here for the Jets. And so I do think that Hackett revenge side of things is real for sure. We'll see if it plays through in this spot. As we get to the afternoon slate, it is Washington on the road at Arizona. Cardinals 3.5-point favorites. Total in this game 50.5. This is a pass for me on the side. It is a pass for me on the total. If you're putting me on the spot, I would have a very, very small and limited lean to Arizona at the current price of -3.5. My issue with the Washington Commanders going forward is that defense is so bad, and it's being disguised by a level of offensive play that cannot be replicated and is in no way sustainable. The Commanders haven't punted in 2 weeks. They have faced a very bad Giants defense and an even worse Bengals defense. In this week, they faced a Cardinals defense that is on that same level as the Giants and the Bengals. This is in no way a good Cardinals defense. And so there is a chance for another week in a row we see the Commanders offense look really good. Now, my issue with this is if I'm looking to back the Arizona Cardinals. Last week, I thought the second half against the Lions defense was concerning. I think Trey McBride being in concussion protocol is concerning as well when you're asking the Cardinals to come out with a bad defense against the Commanders offense that is clicking and cover more than a field goal. Trey McBride is a key part to this offense because Arizona lives in 12 and 13 personnel. It defines everything that they want to do on offense. And he creates such a mismatch for opposing defenses with his ability to win one-on-one and his ability to get open when the defense elects to put more guys down in the box. Seeing how the Commanders tried to press Jamar Chase with St. Juste and how they tried to defend other outside guys for the Bengals, I mean, to me in this matchup just screams a huge opportunity for Marvin Harrison and would normally scream a huge opportunity for Trey McBride. But with him trending in a negative direction, being in the protocol, some concern here that Arizona is not going to be at full strength. And I just wonder if Arizona in this spot with a defense as bad as they have is going to be able to cover the number. And so, again, like I'm looking at Washington and I'm like, this is a team that once you just get a little step back from offense that is playing right now at a level of not punting for multiple games, this defense is so bad that they're not going to be able to win games and they're not going to be able to cover. I don't know if it fully shows up this week. I'm not willing to kind of get in and jump it, but it's certainly a team that I have circled to look to play against in upcoming weeks as well. And that spot potentially next week against Cleveland looks pretty interesting to me. We'll see, but this week is not the spot where I'm going to jump in. New England on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers a 10-point favorite. Total in this game is 39. Playing any favorite north of a touchdown this year has been a death sentence, I think this game is going to be the exception. I think the 49ers win and cover handily, and I think they run up a big number on the New England Patriots. So give me San Francisco in this game -10. To me, this is a game where the 49ers get everything together and finally see everything click. Now, I'm saying that not to say it hasn't yet. We've seen Brock Purdy playing at a level extremely high that is better than anything that he has in spite of everything going on. But let me explain what I mean by that. So looking at the price here was -9.5 on the look ahead. We're at 10. The 49ers lose a game where they have north of a 97% win probability against the Rams, which we talked about how LA exploited all these specific matchups with the knowledge that comes from McVay and what they were able to do. Everything clicked for the Rams, went right. The 49ers blow the lead. Now, we have a 49ers team coming into this game that last week had the late news that Samuel wouldn't play, had Kittle ruled out late. Throughout the game, had Trent Williams still saying he's not 100%. He needed an IV to avoid cramping. As I mentioned, Ward was playing at less than 100%, was dealing with the lower body injury. There was so many things that the 49ers have been playing and overcoming so far this year that I think are righted in this spot. Now as we're getting into game 4 of the season, Trent Williams starting to run out of excuses. Now he played nearly every snap last game. You would expect him to be at 100%. You would expect George Kittle to be back in this game, in this matchup. You would expect Ward to be close to 100% after finishing the game and getting a full week to get right. It's just San Francisco is playing at a level that's really high, but the fact that they're 1-2 in spite of all these things is to me like a team. When I talk about looking at teams and evaluating them in ranges, I think we saw what the 49ers offense and team can look like as a standard in week 1 against the Jets. But we've had 2 really subpar games against Minnesota and against LA relative to what they can produce. And yet they were still, with all these injuries and all these limitations, almost winning those games. And you still had very good quarterback play from Brock Purdy. And so to me, I'm looking at the 49ers here in a spot against the Pats defense that is now really dealing with some injury problems, a Pats offensive line that has so many guys rotating in and out that they're now starting to go away from the ground game. And they're talking about how it's becoming an issue that they don't necessarily have bodies to throw at. And so how is that going to travel? And then furthermore, the Patriots had nothing going on Thursday Night Football last week against Robert Saleh and the Jets defense. Robert Saleh comes from the 49ers defensive scheme. What are the Pats going to do different this week going into San Francisco on the road against the real thing to say that they're going to have more offensive success than they did against the New York Jets last Thursday? I think it's a more difficult matchup against a tougher scheme and a better pass rush with more weapons than what the Jets had. And the Jets just disrupted everything New England wanted to do. And so I think it's a standard or above game here for the 49ers. And I think we see the Patriots' offensive line issues and defensive limitations continue to hamper them. So again, these big favorites not having a lot of success this season. I think San Francisco is the exception, and we see a big game from the 49ers here, and they win and cover at home. Want to continue to catch up on the questions here. I know I've gone away from them in the last couple of weeks, but I want to keep this Q&A a part of it. But it is tough to manage the clock, but also get through to see everything coming through as well in the chat as well. So if you have a question that I missed, just keep pumping it in the live chat, and I'll be able to catch up as well. Nothing more nauseating than listening to Pat and Aaron Rodgers. I'm amazed at how look, I'm not getting into politics. I have everything political muted from Twitter. I don't look at any of it. So I get how there's a divisive side from that. But I find a lot of the game stuff fascinating that they're talking about. And personally, I love a lot of the player podcasts that are coming out and hearing that insight from the field and hearing it from players. It's access and insight like we've never had before. And so I think the more of these segments we get, the better, as just an NFL fan, not as someone who lives in the betting world, but I love it personally. So I can get how some of the political stuff can be off-putting, but for me, the more we get of this player insight and access, the better, for sure. Cleveland on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Las Vegas -1, total 37. Pass on the side, pass on the total. I don't know what we're getting from the Browns offensive line. There's multiple injuries. Wyatt Teller's going to miss extended time. Don't know what we're getting from Conklin. Don't know what we're getting from Willis. Don't know what we're getting from Jones. Quite frankly, have no idea what we're getting from the Browns offensive scheme either. This is a team that was built to be a run-first offense, to set up play action, to take shots off of it. They've completely gone away from the run game. They're having Watson drop back to pass way too much. He's being put in just a completely unfamiliar scenario. And I don't know what the expectation for this team is. And if these offensive line injuries are continuing to push that down the road, I don't know how you can look and comfortably handicap this. Myles Garrett dealing with foot injuries on his left and right foot. He is saying already he is going to miss practice multiple days per week, and that's the expectation. So he's clearly less than 100%. It's kind of a throw your hands up scenario. And it's the same thing for the Raiders on the other side, who have this kind of like lingering uncertainty about who is actually sitting or not with some key guys after the Pierce comments about making business decisions on who is going to be out there. I don't know how to handle that. Is that a sign that the Raiders are unraveling a little bit? Or is it a sign that like guys are starting to quit and check out? I don't know. It's a tough scenario. And so if I'm put on the spot in this game, I would say the Raiders at 1 against all the issues that the Browns have is probably the more intriguing price and the more intriguing handicap, but I couldn't get comfortable looking at it and betting it. I think we might see Raiders money come into the market and this price get pushed up a little bit with all the Cleveland injuries that'll be impactful. But I have no opinion here. It is a pass on the side, and it is a pass for me on the total. Kansas City -8 with a total of 39 at the LA Chargers. We released Kansas City at a better number than 8, and I would still absolutely lean to the Chiefs here at -8. What I will say is the Justin Herbert news is obviously going to have an impact on this number. If he plays, which is a report that we could get later in the week, we will likely see this number come in. I think even if he plays, this is a spot where Kansas City hangs a big number and wins and covers this game as well. So timing-wise, as you're watching this Wednesday morning at 9:40 a.m., puts you in a bit of a bind when you're trying to make a decision at this current price. I see no harm in waiting if you don't already have a bet on Kansas City and you want to come in later. But to me, this is a pretty one-sided game and a pretty one-sided matchup. So beyond just the Justin Herbert news, you have big issues on the offensive line at both left tackle and right tackle. Rashawn Slater dealing with the pec injury. Joe Alt has already been announced that he is going to miss time. When Slater went down against the Steelers, the offensive line was non-functional. We haven't seen what it looks like without Alt because the injury came on the last play of the game. I expect it to be even worse. To me, it would be coaching malpractice to put Justin Herbert, who has suffered 2 ankle-foot injuries in the last 6 weeks and has been put in a walking boot twice for both injuries and limited in both cases, to put him out there with an offensive line that's going to be as limited as this Chargers O-line will be against this Chiefs pass rush. I get the feeling that there's seemingly a decent chance, probably in that 60 to 65% range, that he goes, which will be just a baffling decision. But if he is in the pocket and he is limited mobility-wise, and this offensive line is going to look as bad as I expect it to look, and you have a Chiefs pass rush that can wreck games against great offensive lines, what is the expectation here for the Chargers offense? I think it's incredibly low. And defensively, I think the Chargers are very overrated. And we might be looking at a Chargers defense that has benefited from an incredibly soft opening schedule, get bullied on the ground, especially in the interior, with the Chiefs' run game, which even without Pacheco was still number 1 in rushing success rate last week, which is a testament to how good the offensive line looks. But to me, you're putting Patrick Mahomes in the backfield, and you're looking at this Chargers defense, which so far has played the Las Vegas Raiders in the Minshew debut game. They played the Carolina Panthers with Bryce Young. And then last week, they played the Pittsburgh Steelers and Justin Fields. This is a completely different planet for competition. And so, as much as this number has been seemingly upgraded as the look ahead was uncertain how to price it because of Justin Herbert, I don't think it's gone enough. And I think this is a matchup that Kansas City dominates on both sides of the football. So give me the Chiefs here above a touchdown. But again, release was at a better price. You're waiting on the Herbert news. There's a decent chance this comes back if he is announced in. So timing-wise, just keep that in mind as you're looking at this and what to look at. Buffalo on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens -2 total in this game is 46.5. I would have a lean here to the Ravens at -2. Start to think about the Buffalo Bills and what they have accomplished so far this season. With new defensive coaches at multiple levels, it has been very impressive. With injuries to key linebackers, to key cornerbacks, it's been impressive. And you can't take anything away from what the offense has been doing. But in this matchup, it seems like the first time all season that we are going to see the interior of the Buffalo Bills, where they are banged up the most, really be tested and really be exploited. Some of the best subjective commentary that we have got from a team so far this season came from the Baltimore Ravens after their win against the Dallas Cowboys. Found out a couple interesting notes that I highlighted in the betting talk thread that I think stand out. The first was that Harbaugh last week on Friday skipped special teams practice to work with the offensive line. Might not sound like a significant detail, but the offensive line for Baltimore has been the biggest concern and just a massive point of focus for them dating all the way back to the draft. It was a massive limitation in weeks 1 and 2. They couldn't get it right. They couldn't run the offense they want to. The week in practice leading up to the Cowboys game was all about getting the offense right. Not only did Harbaugh spend extra time, you had Henry spending extra time. Key point of focus. In the game against the Dallas Cowboys, the O-line played the best game that they had all season long. All of the work that they did in practice, the tweaks, the changes, completely showed. The Ravens were dominant on the ground. They got back to the offensive identity that they have been wanting to push. Now, post-game, you have Lamar Jackson taking on this leadership role, interrupts Harbaugh's post-game speech to specifically call out the right side of the offensive line, which has been the biggest issue for the Ravens so far this season. So you have this like concerted effort from the Ravens to pump up the offensive line. We all respect Harbaugh as a coach and what he does. And it seems like now Baltimore building things up, getting a higher level of production. We know from commentary, not only this week, but the last couple of weeks as well, they want to get back to operating out of more multiple tight end sets, get the ball moving on the ground, kind of get back to what the Ravens have looked like in seasons in past, and not so much this spread out wide open Monken offense that he kind of wanted to introduce at the start of last year. And I'm watching that game against the Cowboys, and it's like everything the Ravens wanted came together. And when you think about where that's going to stress an opposing defense, it's in the middle. Now, the Bills so far, they played the Jags, the Dolphins, who suffered QB injuries, and the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals do kind of operate in a similar manner to what the Ravens conceptually want to do and are probably going to do in this game. The Cardinals moved it relatively well on the Bills for 4 quarters. That was a game before a lot of the injuries were sustained for Buffalo, and they have to go through what they're going to have to deal with this game against Baltimore, which is a better version and a more explosive version, what they had to defend against the Cardinals. The Dolphins' O-line was banged up, but they also had the QB injury to Tua, which completely flipped that game upside down. And then the Jags, that game was out of reach before it even started, and that had more to do with the Jags defense and what they put on the field than it was the Bills offense or the Jags offense testing the Bills defense, which never had a chance to do it. So not only on one hand do I want to praise what the Bills have done, but it's like, okay, here's the spot. They're stepping up. It's the Ravens getting back to what they want to do at their core. It's the Ravens matching up against where the Bills' weaknesses should be. If McDermott puts together a game plan on the road here against the Ravens, amazing. Hats off to him. But at this price, we're at a level where if we go back to preseason, the Ravens were rated higher than the Bills. I just start to wonder, it's like now that we're leveling out, where we're essentially pricing these teams equal, the Bills have overcome so much. Is the schedule aiding them a little bit to get to this level where we're now equal? The Ravens have kind of gone the complete opposite route to get to where they are right now. I don't know. It seems like we're leveling out here, and it's maybe not something that I fully agree with. So I'd have a lean here to the Ravens at 2 as well, as they continue to get better offensive line play. And I think that ground game is going to stand out in a big way. Tennessee on the road at the Miami Dolphins. This game is a pick'em with a total of 37. Pass on the side, pass on the total. Won't be betting the game. We'll have it on the extra screen watching it, but it's a stay away for me. Indications seem like Tyler Huntley has a chance to start for the Miami Dolphins. There was an aggregate account that posted it like it was certainty yesterday. Can never really trust those. I looked at McDaniel's press conference quotes. Those seem to indicate that he was leaning towards Huntley. I have a tough time grading what Huntley is or what we're getting from him. I have a similar difficult time grading what the Titans offense is with Will Levis and what we're getting from him on a weekly basis. My Titans reads and calls this year have not been good, and I just haven't had a good read on the Dolphins either. Don't know what to do here with the Dolphins offensive line injuries, which are quite impactful and really limit what the Dolphins want to do. Too many question marks for me here. I don't see anything in the number. It's a stay away from me. There's just way more questions than there are answers for me in this one. Let's finish off with Seattle on the road at Detroit. The Lions, 3.5-point favorites. Total in this game, 47. We finish with some certainty and some confidence. Give me the Lions here, absolutely, at -3.5. Gerard's in the comments. Don't worry. I still like your Seahawks. You know that from preseason takes and some futures and some win totals. Relax. I'm not saying this is death for Seattle. I am saying in this game specifically, I think we see the Seahawks struggle. Now, I look back to week 1. The Lions hosted the Rams, who were fully healthy coming into that game. Nakua was right there. There was the Rams team we expected that everybody was buying and loved in the preseason, went into Detroit Sunday night at like 4 p.m. when the limits are highest, the market is tightest. One of the bigger NFL groups in the betting world was pounding the Lions at home, and that number got up to 6. We are now down just a few weeks later to the Lions 3.5 against the Seattle Seahawks. This is a pretty big adjustment here. And it's hard not to look at what the Seahawks have done this year and be impressed. I love Mike McDonald. I love the defense. However, we have to ask ourselves here, like, are the Seahawks really deserving of this upgrade, or is this influenced by schedule? Because so far the Seahawks and this amazing defense and Mike McDaniel and everything he has done well have faced Bo Nix as a rookie quarterback coming in to make his debut start in Lumen Field, which is a disaster spot for any rookie QB to start, any veteran QB to start, really. Next week, they face Jacoby Brissett and the New England Patriots, who are riddled with O-line injuries. They can't get anything going, and it's one of the more limited offenses in all of the NFL. In week 3, they face the Miami Dolphins, who make the cross-country trip, which I am told is very long based on listeners at a simple handicap, and come in with Skylar Thompson, the backup QB, arguably just as bad of a spot as what the Seahawks faced in week 1 for Bo Nix. Thompson gets injured midway, and you finish the game with Tim Boyle. It has been very easy so far for the Seahawks, especially on the defensive side of things, through 3 weeks of football. Now, I get that Frank Ragnow at center for the Lions is a massive loss, but the difference in competition here for Seattle and what they faced the first 3 weeks compared to what they're going to face against Ben Johnson and the rest of the Lions offense is just night and day. I mean, this is a massive step up. I think it's a massive ask for the Seahawks to perform here. And to see this number where it is relative to what we've been seeing so far and what we were seeing week 1 for the Lions in a home game spot, I can't get there, and I cannot agree with it. And for other injuries that the Lions have on defense, which is fair to point out as a negative, you're looking at the injury report so far this week: Brian Branch, Alex Anzalone, Aleem McNeil, right? There's key injuries for Detroit that certainly are going to impact this number. Should it impact it this much? I think no, because there's a lot of injuries for Seattle too, which I think are very impactful. You're dealing with injuries to Byron Murphy. You're dealing with injuries to Leonard Williams. You're dealing with injuries to Nwosu, and you're dealing with an injury to Baker. So for as many injuries as the Lions have on defense, the Seahawks just as banged up. The Lions are going to be able to run the football in this spot. They got back to it last week, rightfully so. It's going to open up opportunities for Goff in the passing game. I don't agree with this number coming down at all. I think this should be higher. I think it should be closer to 6, and I think the Seahawks are being very overvalued. That's the long and short of this handicap. Give me the Lions here on Monday Night Football, and then in the doubleheader game that more people are absolutely going to be watching. So that is my take on this as well, and that's my take on the entire Week 4 card. Tried to give a little bit more certainty with some games. I know there's been some commentary about like what is a what is a lean, what is a bet, what is a play. It's a tricky kind of balancing act to do these shows when obviously there's a service and a betting component off of this on Monday and Tuesday. In an ideal world, this could just be 100% all out. Here's everything I like. Here's everything I've bet. Here's everything I want to bet. In reality, that's a lot harder to practice. And so I try to make it as informative as I can, being as direct as I can. I appreciate the sentiment that comes from some folks where they're like, you're kind of waffling in and out. And it's just something I balance. So if you find it to be too far one way or the other, that's why the comment section is here. Again, I'm always trying to make these as good as I can. I'm always trying to give everybody a couple things to think about. There was a Facebook group that has, it's all the fans of VSiN shows. And I did a thread where I went in there and I was like, just tell me what you're hearing, what you like, what you don't like, not only from me, but from other folks as well. Like when you're watching shows, like, what do you like? And the consensus, there were about 65 comments, which were awesome to see. If you're a part of that group and you did comment, I appreciate it very much. And basically the consensus was, we like listening to you when you have picks, but really what we're listening to you for is giving your insight and information on games that we can take into account for handicapping ourselves and use that to make decisions down the road. And there was a lot of good back and forth about what makes good betting content and what makes bad betting content. And so I try to give as much info as I can that I feel like you guys find useful, while balancing that with trying to share as many opinions as I can, but also being respectful to people who have subscribed to the service, who are in on plays at numbers that this year we're finding probably more challenging to sustain some value just because things are coming back and forth, and not devalue that as well and not take away from some of the private betting that goes on too. So again, if I'm ever too one way or another, that's why I'm here. Let me know in the comments down below after the video airs. I try to navigate that as best as I can. So that's really what I'm trying to do, and I appreciate that, as everybody is saying. Jesse's saying, lots of talking, get some water. They've got the Tinto on the go this morning. We've started to get agua panela in. For those of you who may be from Latin American countries, my wife is Colombian, as many know. Just awesome coffee. We bought the pot when she went down. She was visiting the parents. She brings the pot back. We found a place to get agua panela. We've got the great coffee. And so there's a good coffee situation going on in the Chernoff household as NFL gets into the latter months of September and we start to feel the weather shift. So got things going on as well. The Deuce of Heart says, as always, F- on the fans watching. I don't agree with that. 403 watching, only 31 thumbs up. Come on, guys. We got to be better. If you have anything you saw on the show that you liked, give a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button down below. I appreciate it very much. A couple questions before we go. Still high on the Philly offense. Tied for 8th in yards per play. Outside T10 in EPA per play. 10th in offensive DVOA. Hurts only behind Levis in turnovers. Thoughts? Sean, I'm not wavering on this opinion. I'm down on them this week because they're down wide receiver 1 and 2. This is an Eagles offense that's only going to get better as the season goes on. I know you're looking at the stats and waiting for them to be bigger. Everything that they're doing is answering questions that have been asked about them in seasons past that were limiting them. And I think this is a unit that's only going to improve. So yes, absolutely still very high on the Philadelphia offense and team as a whole. But this week, Sean, honestly, like they're limited at so much on offense, which is why I like Tampa Bay when you're looking at this. Revenge angle spots, always a great listen. Appreciate it, Paul, for contributing those in the chat. There was a question from Changing 500. Good to see you back for another live stream. Would you look at Carolina playoff or division bet at a depressed price now? Look, I'm not looking to add on Carolina. Full to the gills from the offseason. Riding those out, content with them. I do not need more. With Dalton, they looked like a completely different team. If that's the level of play that we get going forward, which I think we were talking about teams and ranges, to me, that was like 100% of what you're going to get from Carolina. That's like the 3 or 4 outlier games this year. If that turns into 5 of those games, like I think all futures that you're looking at now can be justified. I think that's a big ask. But so no, I'm not adding, but I've got plenty, to put it lightly. A couple more questions I want to get to before we wrap up here. I appreciate all the questions coming in as well. There have been some great ones. Sean, I see you asked that one a lot. It's good to get into. What would a fair price be on Aiden Hutchinson to record a sack or multiple sacks versus Seattle right tackle Stone Forsythe? I do not know what to make that price at all. What I would say is if you want to look at what fair pricing might be and what past closing lines have been, before I left covers, I was working on a prompt tool, and I think it's something handy that everybody can look at if you're trying to find past closing prices for props. If you go to Google and you put player name props covers, you'll get a player page that has all the past closing lines for every market that is available for that player. Aiden Hutchinson should have a page where you can go back and look at all his past prop closing prices that you can use to get to a decision. A couple things that I specified on that page when it was being built that I believe are still intact 2 years later from the product team. I can confirm, but I'm pretty confident it is. The closing prices on that page, which works for any player in the NFL if you want it, come from FanDuel as number 1 or Pinnacle as number 2. The trigger is who opens first. 90% of the time it's going to be FanDuel. And so that's why the majority of the closes on that page are from FanDuel. So keep an eye on that. The second thing to think about is if you don't see something on that page today, it may be because it's not open. In order for the charts to be triggered to display on the page, there has to be an active market, and it is open until 11:59 p.m. on the day of the game, and then it resets, and then the charts will show up again next week. So if you're looking for that with props, that was a page and a product I was involved with that they have maintained, and the product team over there continues to do a great job with that. If you're trying to figure out like what's fair, what's good, what's bad, that's an easy way to go. It's going to be a tough page to scrape if you're trying to do that, but if you're just trying to get a reference point, that would be where you look at it. Hitman gave out Seahawks -4. Correct. I texted him immediately after, and I told him how much I disagree with that pick, and he told me how much he disagrees with ours. So we released the Lions earlier in the week. It was a disagreement, a head-to-head. We've been head-to-head on a few games this year. I hate that that's the case, but yeah, I don't agree with him this week on that one. Last one to wrap up. How's your current sentiment on the Panthers over 5.5 wins? I tailed you there, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not cautiously optimistic. I am optimistic, and I'm confident. Give me Dalton for the season. He's going to be great. So we're in good shape there, Josh. It was ugly weeks 1 and 2. I was feeling the heat, but the fact they made the QB switch is great. So that'll do it for me today on NFL week number 4. Thanks again for everybody stopping by. Hit the subscribe and the thumbs up button down below. And again, if you're watching after the fact and you have comments, drop them down below. Hope to see folks over on bettingtalk.com as well in the weekly threads that I will continue to be posting and trying to keep everybody up to date, as well as on the Simple Handicap podcast, which airs every morning, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific. Have a fantastic Wednesday, everybody. Enjoy week 4. We'll talk to you on the next episode.